Hey, it's Donnie A. So this guitar I'm holding is a 1998 Mexican Fender Strat, and it's seen some better days. I've had it for a couple years now. My in-laws were nice enough to give this to me, and they let me take care of this Gibson Les Paul behind me, which that guitar is a really, really nice guitar. This one, not so much. So my brother-in-law unfortunately passed away, and these were his guitars. And, you know, that guitar is really nice, but he got this one for $60 off somebody he knew. And it came in a gig bag, and I was just recently told that gig bag, when he got it, was covered with mold. So you know it was sitting in an attic or something, but you could tell the bridge on it, the old bridge on it, was covered with rust. So the first thing I did was buy a new bridge off of Amazon, and then the pickups on it were all scratchy. Didn't sound good at all. Every time you went through the switches, it would scratch if it even picked up the pickup. So I like coated this thing with electronic cleaner multiple times, and it's playable now, but the frets have a ton of issues. The necks, it's just like grimy looking. The frets got dirt on both sides of them all over this thing. The frets, you can literally take your fingernail and catch it on the ridge of the fret on the top of them, because the frets are so flattened. But I just really think it'd be really nice to fix it up and make it into a nice guitar that has some sentimental value to it, instead of just getting rid of it, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the neck on this, and I'm going to replace all the pickups. And I'm doing this as easy as I can. This is a Mexican Fender Strat, so I bought a Mexican Fender neck right here, and this came from Franklin Guitar Works off Reverb, and I got a deal on it. So they said it's never been used or anything, but it is a Mexican neck, so it's off the Player Series. It looks like it's a 2022 based on the date on it. So it feels brand new and everything. So I just found them looking for a neck, and they basically said they had a bunch of these. But, if you're looking for a deal on something, they seem like they'd be a good place to use. I'm certainly not sponsored by them. And then the pickups don't sound great in this thing. So what I did was bought a new pickguard, and I got this from the STRATosphere on eBay. Again, not sponsored by them either. This is American Professional 2 Stratocaster, which is an American Strat. This thing's fully wired up, got all the pots in it. The switch feels good in it. So I'm gonna take this out and install it up here. You just gotta solder some ground points, and you gotta solder the output jack. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm gonna fix this thing up and see if we can get it sounding good. All right, first step's take all the strings off. I got my Camp Kiwani cup out. If you know, that's for all my loose parts to go in, all my screws. Then I started taking the back plate off. I've sped all this footage up so you don't have to watch every step and every screw that comes out of this thing. So you can just get a general idea of what had to go into this. So I started taking off the pick guard, and then I took off the jack plate. When I took off the jack plate, I wanted to make sure I understood where the white wire was going and where the ground was going. So the white wire is going to the lug that has the ears on it, and the black wire is going to the round lug. And I had a little trouble getting these off once I got my soldering iron out, because they were really pushed through the hole in the lug and then wrapped around it. So it was just difficult to get the solder to all come off of there and pull those wires through. But just playing around with it a little bit, I got it out of there. Then I pulled these wires out and had to flip the guitar over now that side's done and unsolder the ground to the trem claw. And this was difficult because there was like a dime-sized amount of solder on that trem claw. So I had to turn up the heat on the soldering iron to really start get that to melt. And then once we finally got it off of there, it was okay. One thing, there was just some extra solder still sitting in there on that trem claw, so I just cleaned that off and got those pieces out of there. So the old pickguard's out of there, so now we got the new pickguard. The new pickguard had 4 wires on it, and the old pickguard only had 3. So there was an extra ground wire on that, and I found out that extra ground wire was actually supposed to go to the shielding paint, which on the American Professional 2s, they must have shielding paint in these bodies, but there is no shielding paint in a 98 Mexican Fender Strat, so that was a little confusing. And I decided what I was going to do after I pushed these wires through was basically send those 2 ground wires through the back of the body to the trem claw, and I decided to solder them both to the trem claw here. That way they'd both be grounded. I wouldn't have any loose wires or anything. Once I got the wires routed through the body, I had to strip them, and I stripped about 1/4 inch off of them because I didn't want too much showing. And then I tried to tin the wires, and I tried to wrap them around the lugs on the jack the same way that I saw them before, because it did make for a good connection. So I soldered the white one onto the lug with the ears. And I grabbed the black wire and I tinned that with a little solder on there. And then I pushed it through that lug and tried to wrap that one around as well before I soldered that on. And when you solder, you really want to make sure you're heating up the contact point before you put the solder on. So you're heating up the joint where the wire and the lug are going to join before you put the solder on. And then I screwed that back down. So the jack part's all set. And then what I did was fit in the pickguard, and I screwed down this with 2 screws just to make sure that it wouldn't move, since the wires are already routed through the back. And I actually got a candle out so that I could put some wax on these screws. I read online that you want to wax your screws when you're putting them into wood, so that they have a little lubricant for them. It's better for them. And then I needed to strip the wires on the back that were going to the trem claw, and strip both of those about 1/4 inch as well. Just enough showing to solder it on. And this was actually probably the hardest thing I ran into, was soldering these 2 ground points onto the trem claw. So first I used the tip that I had on the whole time, and it was a pointed tip on my soldering iron. And what I did was change it out for a thicker tip so that I could get more coverage area. I turned the soldering iron up, and the reason I did that is because I tried to solder this a couple times and I couldn't get the connection to stay. So what I turned it up and put a thicker tip on so that I could really heat up that trem claw and put a lot of heat to that trem claw before I even put the wire down to it. That way I knew that everything was hot, and then I put the solder on and got it to connect, and that worked well. So I did it with the second wire too, and that one went on first try. But this was definitely the most difficult part. I wasn't prepared for how much you needed to heat up that trem claw plate, because it's so much thicker than just the wire that you're trying to heat up. Once that was all set, I tugged on those wires after a second to make sure that the connections were good. They were good, so I pushed those wires back through the body. And then I screwed on the back plate. Now that it was all set, I just did a tap test. So I plugged it into an amp and then just took my screwdriver, went through all the positions to make sure that those pickups are working well. And you're really just tapping it lightly here, and you'll hear the sound if it's good. So unplugged that, all set. Now it's time to move on to the neck. And the neck, it was a little daunting at first, taking a guitar neck off a body, but this is something really anybody could do if you have another guitar neck that fits. I mean, it's 4 screws to take it off, so you just get it off of there, no problem. Pops right off. Make sure you're keeping all your screws together. That neck pops right off, and then the next neck, you just want to make sure that it fits in. You want to put the base of it in first and slide it down in. So that was perfect. So you just want to grab onto it while you're flipping the guitar back over, put that plate back on, and start getting those screws in there. And I put the wax on these. Hold that tight while you're screwing this in so it doesn't move. The holes all lined up perfectly. I was a little worried that it wasn't going to line up just because it's a 2022 neck going on a 1998 body, but they're both Mexican, they're both Fenders, so everything fit perfectly, which is great. The only issue I really ran into here is that once I got the strings on and got it all set up, I actually realized I couldn't get it set up and the entire guitar buzzed. And there was nothing I could do about it because the saddle, I raised the saddle as high as I could go, and I found out that I needed to shim the guitar neck. And there was no shim on the original neck, but I found out that I did need a shim on this. So I just bought one of the solid maple shims. I found it off Amazon. It was like $10 for 3 of them, so I could figure out what size I needed. And I put that shim in so that I could raise that neck up and be able to set this thing up. So then I just put the rest of the screws into the pickguard and pulled the plastic off of that pickguard, and we were ready to go. Put some strings on it. Now I'll play through it for you guys.